They thought it was a joke. The room was full of men who never joked, armed guards, silent lawyers, faces trained to reveal nothing. And at the center of it all sat the mafia boss, relaxed, confident, already bored. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Not toward his translator. Not toward his lawyers. Toward the waitress. She had been standing there quietly for over an hour, refilling glasses, avoiding eye contact, pretending not to hear the conversations that could get someone killed. The boss smirked. "Translate this," he said. $10 million if you get it right." Laughter rippled through the room. A waitress. A contract worth millions. A language even professionals struggled to read. She looked at the paper. Just for a second. And in that moment, something changed. Because what none of them knew was that the document in front of her wasn't just a contract. It was a trap. And the quiet waitress was the only person in the room who understood exactly who it was meant to destroy. Set up written as a fully immersive, documentary-style script, paced deliberately, rich in atmosphere, and engineered for retention and tension. This flows directly from the opening hook you approved. The room returned to its rhythm slowly. Glasses clinked again. Chairs creaked. A low murmur of voices filled the space, careful and controlled, like men who knew better than to speak too loudly around power. The waitress stepped back into her place against the wall. No one asked her name. No one ever did. She was dressed like the others, plain black uniform, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest efficiency, not personality. Her hair was tied back neatly, her posture neutral. The kind of presence designed to disappear. And for most of the night, she had. The restaurant itself was closed to the public. Its front lights were dimmed, the open sign flipped hours ago. From the street, it looked like another quiet place shutting down for the night. But behind the heavy curtains and reinforced doors, a very different kind of business was underway. This wasn't a dinner. It was a meeting. At the center of the long table sat the boss. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Power had taught him something early: men listen more closely when they had to lean in. He was older than most of the men around him, but no one mistook that for weakness. His suit was simple, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. No jewelry. No unnecessary movement. Just calm certainty. To his right sat his translator. A man flown in for this meeting. Educated. Recommended. Trusted, at least until tonight. In front of him lay the document. One page. Dense. Compact. Written in a dialect that hadn't been used officially in decades. A version of the language shaped by backroom agreements, family codes, and favors that never made it into records. The translator wiped his hands on his trousers for the third time. He had started strong. Confident. Explaining phrases, interpreting clauses, offering context. Then he slowed. His sentences became shorter. His voice flatter. Now, he had stopped entirely. "I just need a moment," the translator said, forcing a smile. The boss didn't respond right away. He leaned back in his chair instead, watching him the way a predator watches a hesitation. Around the table, the guards shifted their weight. Subtle. Almost unnoticeable. But the waitress noticed. She noticed everything. She had learned long ago that silence was a skill. That survival depended less on what you said and more on what you heard, and what you pretended not to understand. She refilled a glass near the far end of the table, her movements precise, practiced. Her eyes stayed down. But her ears were open. The translator cleared his throat. "This phrase here," he said, tapping the page, "it's ambiguous. It could mean shared responsibility or, the boss asked calmly, or shared blame, depending on the context." The room tightened. Shared blame was not a phrase anyone wanted attached to their name. The boss nodded once. "Continue." The translator hesitated. The waitress paused mid-step. She didn't look at the paper. She didn't need to. She already knew which phrase it was. Already knew why his voice had changed. She stepped back, pressed her shoulder lightly against the wall, and waited. The meeting dragged on. More pauses. More clarifications. Each explanation seemed to raise more questions instead of answering them. One of the lawyers leaned in, whispering urgently to the boss. Another man, one of the guards, watched the translator too closely. Not like protection. Like calculation. This deal mattered. It wasn't just about money. It was about territory. About alliances that had been holding together by habit more than trust. One wrong interpretation could light a fuse no one could put out. The waitress had seen men like this before. Powerful men who believed danger announced itself loudly. It never did. She remembered her first week working here. How the manager had taken her aside, lowered his voice, and said only one thing. Do your job. Don't ask questions. And if you hear something you shouldn't, forget it. She had nodded. 4 months, that rule had kept her safe. Until tonight. The boss leaned forward again, elbows resting lightly on the table. You said this was routine, he said to the translator. Not angry. Just factual. It is, the translator replied quickly. It's just, whoever wrote this knew exactly how to hide intent behind formality. The boss smiled faintly. That wasn't reassuring. The waitress felt the shift before it happened. A subtle change in the air. The kind that came right before attention moved. The boss's eyes drifted. Not to the guards. Not to the lawyers. To her. She felt it immediately. That invisible pressure. The moment when you knew you'd been noticed. You, he said. The room went quiet. She didn't react at first. That, too, was instinct. Never assume power is speaking to you unless it has to. You there, he repeated, lifting a finger slightly. The waitress. Slowly, she turned. Yes, sir? Her voice was soft. Neutral. Respectful. He studied her for a moment. Head tilted. As if seeing her properly for the first time. You've been standing there a long time, he said. You hear everything. She lowered her eyes. I'm just doing my job. A few men smiled. Others didn't. The boss tapped the document once. You speak languages? The question landed lightly, but it was loaded. A little, she said. How little, he asked. Enough to serve customers, she replied carefully. A ripple of amusement passed through the table. The translator laughed nervously. This isn't exactly menu language. No, the boss agreed. Then, without warning, he slid the document across the table. It stopped inches from her hand. Translate this, he said. $10 million if you get it right. The waitress looked at the paper. Just long enough. Not to read it. To confirm something. The room waited for her to laugh. To apologize. To back away. She didn't. Instead, she reached out and touched the page, lightly, like it might bite. This word, she said calmly, pointing to a single line. It doesn't mean what he said. Every head snapped toward her. The translator froze. The boss's smile vanished. It means, she continued, voice steady, that whoever signs this agrees to take responsibility for actions already taken, even if they didn't authorize them. Silence fell hard. No laughter. No movement. The boss leaned forward slowly. Say that again, he said. And just like that, the false safety of the room collapsed. Because the quiet waitress had just stepped into a conversation worth $10 million. And everyone now understood. This meeting was no longer under control. No one spoke. Not immediately. The kind of silence that settled over the room wasn't awkward, it was dangerous. It pressed down on the table, on the walls, on every man sitting there, as if the air itself had decided to wait and see who would move first. The waitress kept her hand on the edge of the table, fingers relaxed, as though she hadn't just rewritten the meaning of a multimillion-dollar contract with one sentence. The translator stared at the paper. Then at her. Then back at the paper again. That's not the standard interpretation, he said finally, his voice thinner now. That phrasing can be read several ways. She didn't look at him. It can, she said. If you don't know who wrote it. The boss raised a hand. The translator stopped talking instantly. The boss's eyes never left the waitress. They weren't angry. Not yet. They were sharp. Focused. Measuring. You're saying my translator is wrong, the boss said. She chose her words carefully. Every syllable mattered now. I'm saying the document is written to look harmless, she replied. But it isn't. A chair creaked somewhere behind her. A guard shifted his stance. She could feel them recalculating her value in real time. The boss leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. Continue, he said. That wasn't permission. It was a test. She inhaled once, slowly, then spoke. The sentence structure is old, she explained. Not formal old. Family old. The kind used when you want something to survive translation. The verb tense here, she tapped the page again, places responsibility in the past, not the future. The translator swallowed. That doesn't make sense, he said quickly. Contracts don't work like that. She finally looked at him. Criminal ones do. The word landed heavy. The boss's lips twitched, not a smile, but not far from one either. And what responsibility, exactly, he asked, would I be accepting? She hesitated. Just for a beat. Long enough for the room to tighten again. Any retaliation that follows, she said. Any consequences already in motion. Any blood spilled after this agreement is signed. Someone cursed under their breath. One of the lawyers leaned forward urgently. That's not possible. That would make the signer liable for everything, she finished. The boss didn't look at the lawyer. He looked at the translator. You missed that. The translator's face had gone pale. I didn't think. No, the boss said quietly. You didn't know. That was worse. He turned back to the waitress. You're confident? Yes. You're certain? Yes. And you're willing to say this in front of everyone here? She met his gaze. I already did. Another silence. This one felt sharper. The boss stood. The sound of his chair sliding back echoed like a gunshot. He walked slowly around the table, stopping just short of her. Close enough that she could smell his cologne. Clean. Expensive. Controlled. Where did you learn to read things like this? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't know, but because the truth would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer yet. From listening, she said instead. He studied her face, searching for cracks. For fear. For ego. There was none. Finish it, he said at last. Translate the rest. Slowly. A guard reached for the door. It locked with a soft click. Phones were collected. One by one. Placed in a metal tray on the sideboard. The meeting had officially changed. The waitress took the document. This time, she really read it. Line by line. She spoke steadily, carefully unraveling the language. Explaining how clauses overlapped. How certain phrases only activated if certain events had already occurred. The further she went, the worse it became. This section, she said, creates deniability for the other party. The boss frowned. Explain. If violence follows, they claim you acted alone. If authorities intervene, the wording places intent on your side. They walk away clean. The lawyer's face drained of color. The translator sat rigid, hands clenched in his lap. And this part? The boss asked, pointing to a line near the bottom. She paused. This part, she said, is where it stops being business. She looked up. It's a confession, she said quietly. Written so that once you sign, it becomes yours. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. One man stood abruptly, knocking his chair over. The boss raised his hand again. Silence returned. Slow. Reluctant. He looked at the waitress with something new in his expression now. Not amusement. Interest. Who else understands this dialect? He asked. No one here, she said. That's a bold claim. It's not, she replied. If they did, this meeting wouldn't be happening. The boss turned to his guards. Search the room. They moved instantly. As they did, the waitress felt it. That prickle at the back of her neck. Someone was watching her too closely. Someone who hadn't spoken. Someone who knew she'd gone too far. She continued anyway. Because stopping now would be worse. There's more, she said. But you won't like it. The boss gestured for her to continue. She traced her finger to the final paragraph. This last sentence, she said, only activates if the signer survives the next 72 hours. A pause. Why would that matter? The boss asked. She looked up slowly. Because the people who wrote this, she said, didn't expect you to. And somewhere in the room, someone moved their hand toward a weapon. The movement was small. Almost nothing. But in rooms like this, small movements were never accidents. The waitress didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. She felt it, the subtle shift in weight, the faint scrape of leather, the breath that came just a second too fast. Someone near the far end of the table had reached instinctively, not for comfort, but for control. The boss noticed too. He didn't look at the man. Not yet. Instead, he spoke calmly. No one moves. The hand froze. The waitress lowered the document to the table, palms flat against the wood. Her heartbeat stayed steady, but her senses sharpened. This was the moment when stories like this usually ended, suddenly, violently, without warning. But the boss wasn't finished listening. You said 72 hours, he said. Explain. She nodded once. The phrasing ties your survival to liability, she said. If you're alive after 3 days, every action taken by your organization during that window becomes retroactively authorized by you. The lawyer whispered, That's insane. No, she said. It's clever. The boss's eyes narrowed. So if something happens, he said slowly, it looks like I ordered it. Yes. And if I don't survive? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The implications settled heavily over the table. The boss exhaled through his nose. A quiet sound. Almost a laugh. They planned this well. Yes, she agreed. They planned for you to sign without fully understanding it. And who, he asked, would benefit most from that? No one answered. Because everyone already knew. The guards had finished searching the room. No weapons found beyond the ones already visible. No hidden devices. No surprises. That didn't relax anyone. If anything, it made things worse. The boss finally turned his gaze to the far end of the table. To you, he said. The man stiffened. He was one of the quieter ones. Always had been. Not a guard. Not a lawyer. An intermediary. Someone who moved between families, between territories. A man trusted because he rarely spoke. Stand up, the boss said. The man hesitated. Just a fraction too long. 2 guards moved instantly, flanking him. He stood. What role did you play in this deal? The boss asked. The man smiled thinly. Same as always. I facilitated. The waitress watched him closely now. His eyes didn't meet hers. They flicked past her instead, toward the door. Toward distance. Toward escape. This dialect, the boss continued, it's not common. No, the man said. It isn't. And yet you brought us a contract written entirely in it. The man shrugged. That was their choice. The boss nodded slowly. Then turned back to the waitress. What else? The room leaned in. She scanned the page again, though she already knew what she was going to say. She had been hoping, quietly, that she wouldn't have to. There's a secondary trigger, she said. Buried in repetition. Repetition? The lawyer asked. Yes, she replied. Certain phrases appear more than once. That's not a mistake. It's a signal. She tapped the page twice. If the signer attempts to renegotiate, withdraw, or delay, she said, the agreement defaults into an enforcement clause. The boss's jaw tightened. Enforcement meaning? Meaning the other party is authorized to act immediately. Without warning. The intermediary laughed softly. You're speculating. She looked at him now. No, she said. I'm translating. His smile faded. The boss walked closer to her again. You're very calm, he observed. She met his eyes. Panic doesn't help. That confidence, he said. It comes from experience. Yes. With this kind of language. With people who use it, she corrected. The room fell silent again. The boss straightened. Everyone stays seated, he said. Except you. He pointed, not at the waitress. At the intermediary. Step away from the table. The man hesitated. Then obeyed. As he moved, the waitress noticed something else. The translator. He was sweating now. More than before. His eyes darted between the intermediary and the document. She turned slightly toward him. You didn't miss this by accident, she said quietly. His head snapped up. What? You knew enough to understand something was wrong, she continued. But not enough to explain it. That's not. You were chosen, she said. Because partial understanding makes plausible deniability. The boss turned sharply. Is that true? The translator opened his mouth. Closed it. The answer was written all over his face. The boss exhaled slowly. Interesting, he murmured. He turned back to the intermediary, now standing alone near the door. Who wrote it? The boss asked. The man said nothing. Who benefits if I sign? The boss pressed. Still nothing. The waitress felt it again. That tightening. That invisible countdown. They didn't expect me, she said suddenly. Every head turned toward her. They didn't plan for someone like me to be here, she continued. That's why the language is so confident. So final. The boss tilted his head. And why is that? Because they assumed, she said, that anyone in this room would either be loyal or blind. The intermediary laughed again. Louder this time. Forced. You're making yourself very important, he said. She didn't respond. The boss did. You are, he said to her. Important. The word carried weight. The intermediary's expression changed. Just for a moment. Fear flashed there. The boss gestured to the guards. Take him, he said. The room exploded into motion. Chairs scraped back. Voices rose. The intermediary lunged, but not toward the door. Toward her. Everything slowed. The waitress stepped back instinctively as hands grabbed, bodies collided, a weapon clattered to the floor. A gunshot rang out. The sound tore through the room like thunder. When the noise settled, everyone froze. The intermediary lay on the floor, restrained, bleeding, but alive. The boss stood over him. Then looked at the waitress. You just became the most valuable person in this room, he said quietly. She didn't answer. Because she knew. Value like that never came without a price. And whatever came next would be worse than anything that had happened so far. The room was silent again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight. It pressed down like stone, a tangible reminder that nothing in this meeting would ever return to normal. The mafia boss stood over the restrained intermediary, eyes sharp, measuring. Guards flanked him, weapons lowered but ready. The lawyers looked pale, uncertain, as though every word they'd prepared to say had already been rendered meaningless. And the translator slumped in his chair, the beginnings of panic etched into every line of his face. The waitress, calm, collected, utterly aware, picked up the document once more. She had already read it fully, twice. She knew exactly what was coming. But explaining it now required precision. And courage. She cleared her throat softly. This document isn't what it seems, she began. Her voice was steady, but each word landed with the weight of inevitability. The clauses, the phrasing, it's designed to manipulate the signer. It looks like a standard agreement, but in reality, it's a trap. The boss's eyes narrowed. A trap? He asked, his voice low, deliberate. Explain. She traced the lines with her finger, showing them as if highlighting invisible threats. It wasn't written to benefit you or your organization. It was written to expose weaknesses. To set you up. Every term, every phrase, every repetition, it's a test. A test that assumes the signer is either loyal or ignorant. And you are neither. A gasp slipped from one of the lawyers. Even the guards shifted. The intermediary's eyes widened in terror, realizing for the first time that he had been part of something far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Who wrote this? The boss demanded, his voice sharp now. Who would orchestrate such a thing? The waitress paused. She could feel the room leaning in, hanging on her words. She allowed a small, calculated pause before speaking. Someone who knew your organization intimately. Someone who understood your methods, your habits, someone who could predict your every reaction. The boss's jaw tightened. And this trap. Who benefits? Not who you think, she said. The person it targets isn't the signer. It's the people who surround them. Your allies. Your so-called trusted men. They were designed to make mistakes. To reveal themselves. And now, she let her words hang. The document has revealed exactly who is loyal and who isn't. The intermediary tried to speak. The boss cut him off with a glance that froze him in place. Stop, the boss said. Let her finish. She continued. This last paragraph is the most dangerous. It contains a contingency. A clause that activates if anyone attempts to interfere with the contract, anyone not directly involved. And it's tied to survival. If you survive the next 72 hours, you inherit responsibility for all subsequent actions. The translator's face drained of color. That's impossible, he stammered. No legal framework can. She ignored him. It's not legal, she said. It's lethal. It's designed to control behavior through fear. To force decisions you didn't intend to make. And it assumes the signer will not understand it fully until it's too late. The boss's eyes darkened. He glanced at his guards, then back at the document. And if I sign it, he asked quietly, what happens? You become a target, she said simply. But more importantly, you gain power without realizing it. The document shifts the balance. You could control outcomes you never intended, all by surviving. A low, incredulous laugh escaped the intermediary. She's lying, he said, struggling against the guards. No one can plan this. You underestimate her, the boss said, his voice cutting through the room. He looked at the waitress, measuring her calm. You understand this better than anyone here. Don't you? Yes, she said. And I also understand that knowing is dangerous. The room collectively held its breath. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant traffic outside, and the steady breathing of the waitress. The boss's gaze sharpened. And who benefits most from this knowledge? She looked at him directly, unwavering. Someone like me, she said. Someone who knows how to read between the lines. Someone who doesn't just see the words, but understands their intent. The intermediary's face went pale. He knew, as did everyone else, that he had just been exposed. His role as facilitator, his careful maneuvers, all of it now laid bare. The boss exhaled slowly. A quiet, measured sound that carried authority. Interesting, he said. You weren't supposed to be here. And yet, here you are. Yes, she replied. And now you know. He turned to his guards. Keep him restrained, he said. Then his eyes returned to the waitress. This changes everything. If what you say is true, the balance of power in this room has shifted. She nodded once. It already has. The tension that had been simmering all evening now boiled. Every man at the table understood that nothing they thought they controlled was still under their control. The air felt heavier, more dangerous. Threats were unspoken but palpable. Every glance, every breath, carried implication. The boss finally leaned back, studying her. So you're saying, he said slowly, that this document, this contract, it was never about money. It was about control. Manipulation. Exposure. She nodded. Exactly. The money was a distraction. The real purpose was leverage, over you, over everyone here, over decisions no one else could see coming. He stood, moving slowly around the table again. Guards followed, tense but silent. He stopped beside the waitress, looking down at her. And you, he said, are the only one who saw it all. Yes, she said. Her voice was calm, almost eerily so. And now I know what needs to happen next. The intermediary struggled, realizing too late that the trap wasn't designed to punish him, it was designed to expose him. Every action he had taken, every calculation, had been observed, anticipated, and now revealed. The boss's eyes shifted toward the translator. You brought this here, he said quietly, But you didn't fully understand it. Did you? The translator swallowed, silent. The waitress shook her head slightly. He didn't. And neither did anyone else. That's why you should listen carefully. The boss's expression hardened. And what should I do? You survive, she said. You survive and observe. You act only when the clauses demand it, not before. And you trust no one, not even the men who brought this to you. The air felt charged. Every man in the room realized they were part of a game far bigger than they had imagined. A game that had already begun. The boss studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, he said. We play by your rules, for now. She nodded. Calm. Confident. In control, but always aware of the danger. The shift had completed. The room was no longer governed by the original hierarchy. Knowledge had become the ultimate weapon. And the quiet waitress, underestimated until this moment, had just seized it. The intermediary's panic grew. The translator trembled slightly. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. And the boss, he recognized something he hadn't felt in years. Respect. But respect in that room was dangerous. Because everyone knew that power, once shifted, could be taken back, if you survived long enough. The waitress laid the document down, her eyes scanning the faces around her. Every detail, every reaction, every flicker of fear or doubt was noted. She understood now that the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. And somewhere in the shadows of the room, waiting and watching, an unseen adversary already began planning their next move. Because in a house built on control and fear, the one who knows too much is never safe, but sometimes, that knowledge is all that stands between life and death. The room felt smaller now. Every sound, every breath, every shift of weight pressed against the walls like invisible hands. The calm the waitress had maintained until now was starting to fracture, not in her resolve, but in the air itself. Danger was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. The intermediary, restrained but furious, had begun thrashing, pulling at the guards with desperate strength. His breathing was ragged, sharp, a living accusation. He spat words between clenched teeth, accusations and threats in equal measure. You think this changes anything? This is meaningless. She doesn't know, she can't know. The boss's eyes were cold now. The amusement of earlier had vanished entirely, replaced by a razor-sharp calculation. He didn't move hastily. He didn't need to. He understood that every motion had meaning, and every pause carried consequences. Enough, he said quietly. The voice wasn't raised, but it carried the weight of command. The guards tightened their grip on the intermediary. The waitress shifted slightly, keeping her hands visible, her posture neutral, but her mind raced. She had anticipated some of this, yes. But even the best planning couldn't account for the unpredictable chaos of fear combined with desperation. She looked at the boss. He studied her. Their eyes locked. Unspoken understanding passed between them. The next few moments could decide everything. Not just money, not just loyalty, not just survival, but life itself. A low groan came from the intermediary as he attempted another desperate lunge. One of the guards reacted instantly, pushing him back to the ground. A pistol clicked against the floor, accidentally knocked off a holster in the struggle. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The boss didn't flinch. He looked at the document on the table. The pages, already partially translated by the waitress, now seemed to hold the weight of the room itself. Each line, each word, each clause had become a weapon. And the realization hit the intermediary as he struggled against his restraints. He had been a pawn from the beginning. The waitress took a step closer to the table. Her voice, calm yet precise, carried across the room. The last section, she said, activates only if anyone interferes. If anyone tries to manipulate the outcome before the full term is executed, the consequences fall directly on them. No exceptions. Every eye in the room followed her. The translator's face had drained of all color. The lawyers clutched at their notes, hoping for guidance, knowing none would come. The guards tightened their grips, tense but uncertain. Even the boss, a man who had seen blood spill in boardrooms and back alleys alike, acknowledged the weight of her words. The intermediary's voice trembled as he tried to speak. You can't, this is insane. Nobody. The boss raised a hand. Silence. Then he walked toward the intermediary, slow and deliberate, each step measured. You've underestimated her, he said. You've underestimated everyone in this room except me. The man froze, realizing too late that the room no longer followed the rules he had assumed were fixed. Every alliance he counted on had been exposed. Every plan he had laid was visible now. And at the center of it all stood a waitress who had remained calm, composed, and deadly in her intelligence. The boss stopped directly behind the intermediary. Do you understand what happens now? He asked. The man began, but he didn't finish. The waitress spoke then, her tone soft but lethal. If you move, if you interfere, if you attempt to manipulate anything further, it will be on you. Not on me. Not on him. On you. And the consequences, she let her voice drop slightly, letting the weight of the unsaid hang in the air, will be final. The intermediary's eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape that didn't exist. Fear clawed at him from every direction. Every man in the room understood the stakes now. Survival was not a guarantee. Control was an illusion. And the power balance had shifted irreversibly. A sudden movement at the far end of the room, the translator had stood abruptly. His hands shook slightly, but his voice found strength. She's right. None of us understood the full implications. This could have gone very badly. The boss nodded slowly, acknowledging the rare honesty. Then he looked at the waitress again. And you, he said, voice low, deliberate, are the only one who can guide us through this. One mistake, and everything collapses. She met his gaze evenly. I know, she said. And I will not fail. But you must follow the instructions precisely. No improvisation. No assumptions. The room tensed. Every man understood that survival was no longer about strength or loyalty, it was about obedience to knowledge. And for the first time, the boss, the guards, the lawyers, the translator, even the intermediary, realized the gravity of underestimating someone like her. The intermediary's panic intensified. He struggled, kicking against the floor, and the guards responded immediately. A chair was overturned in the chaos. Papers scattered. The document fluttered across the polished table, momentarily exposing lines the boss had not yet reviewed. The waitress leaned down, retrieving the paper with precise care. Careful, she said, voice calm. Every line matters. Every word matters. One misstep could trigger consequences beyond your understanding. The boss observed her. The men in the room observed her. And in that observation, a shift occurred. Fear became respect. Panic became calculation. Chaos became potential strategy. Time slowed. Every second stretched, waited with anticipation. Micro cliffhanger hung in the air. Would the intermediary resist? Would a guard misinterpret a gesture? Would a single word spoken too soon undo the delicate balance she had established? The waitress spoke again, slowly, deliberately, walking them through the final clauses. Each line she translated heightened the tension, each explanation tightening the invisible noose around the room's previous power structures. She highlighted every trap, every hidden contingency, every clause designed to punish overconfidence or inaction. The intermediary's face grew ashen. He understood, finally, that his own schemes had been predicted. That the contract, the clauses, the hidden triggers, all were designed not just to control the boss, but to expose him and anyone who thought themselves untouchable. The boss, silent now, processed each word. His expression shifted from anger to calculation, to grudging admiration. He recognized a truth he rarely faced. In a room built on intimidation and dominance, knowledge, precisely applied, was the deadliest weapon. A sudden shift in the intermediary's movement, a twitch, a glance, made the guards tighten their grips. The sound of a chair scraping across the floor reverberated. And then, a pistol clicked as one of the men fumbled, testing the room's fragile control. The waitress froze. Eyes on the document, then on the room, then back to the boss. Her calm was deliberate. She didn't react to the chaos. She controlled it by presence alone. You see, she said softly. Everything you thought you controlled is gone. Survival now depends on understanding. On patience. On adherence. One false step and she let it hang. The intermediary whimpered. The translator exhaled shakily. The lawyer's hands trembled over their notes. Even the boss felt it. The tension was now absolute, the emotional peak reached. And then, silence. But the silence was charged, electric, suffocating. The boss finally spoke, voice low but carrying authority. Very well. We proceed. But every move, every action, every word, is yours to judge. Understand the responsibility? Yes, the waitress replied. Calm. Controlled. Lethal in intellect, untouchable in perception. And in that quiet affirmation, the emotional peak crystallized. The room, the deal, the power, all had shifted. No one would ever see her the same way again. The chaos had become a weapon, the fear a tool, and the knowledge she possessed the difference between survival and annihilation. The room waited. The clock ticked. And the final act, the resolution, was about to begin. The room was still, but the tension hung like a living thing. Every man present understood that nothing from the previous hours could be undone. The contracts, the clauses, the hidden triggers, all of it had shifted the balance of power. And at the center of it, a quiet waitress who had, until tonight, been invisible. The boss sat down slowly, his hands folded over the table. He exhaled. The room had gone from chaos to control, but control in a new form, one that no one had anticipated. He looked at the document. Its weight was not in paper or ink, but in the knowledge it contained. And in that knowledge was survival. You've done more than anyone here, he said quietly. You've saved me from a mistake that could have destroyed everything. The waitress remained calm. Her eyes scanned the men around the table, noting reactions, measuring the subtle shifts in posture and breath. It wasn't about saving anyone, she said. It was about understanding what was already set in motion. The boss nodded. And now? What happens to those who tried to interfere? A silence fell. All eyes turned to the intermediary, who had been restrained and humiliated by the very clauses he had once believed would protect him. He trembled, realizing that he had been exposed not only as a traitor but as a man whose arrogance had blinded him to the rules of this game. She knows everything, the boss said, almost to himself. And you? He pointed to the intermediary. You are now accountable. Every misstep, every betrayal, every attempt to manipulate, it's yours. The intermediary's lips quivered. He knew the gravity of what had just been revealed. His plans, his schemes, his partial understanding of the document, all of it had been anticipated. Every move he had made now fell under scrutiny. Every action could be traced back to him. The guards relaxed slightly but did not leave their posts. The room still felt dangerous. Not because of violence, but because knowledge was now the weapon. And the waitress held it all. The translator, who had been silent for the last tense moments, finally spoke. I didn't understand how deep this went, he admitted. I underestimated it. I underestimated her. The waitress met his gaze briefly. Understanding comes with patience and attention, she said. You can't fake it. Not in situations like this. The boss leaned back. He studied the room once more, his eyes lingering on each person present. And the contract? He asked. Do we sign it? Do we walk away? She picked up the document, carefully scanning the final lines. The document has already served its purpose, she said. Its clauses have revealed the truth about loyalty, knowledge, and intent. Signing it now would only be redundant. Dangerous, even. The boss nodded slowly. He understood the significance. The contract was more than a legal instrument, it was a test. A filter. A revelation. And those who survived it now knew their place. Turning to the intermediary, the boss spoke again, his voice low and precise. You are dismissed from any authority here. You will no longer influence outcomes. Any attempt to interfere will be considered a breach, punishable immediately. The man's shoulders slumped. Fear replaced his arrogance. He realized that he had miscalculated, that he had overestimated his own influence. The room had shifted around him. He had been exposed. And there was no coming back. The guards moved to escort him out, carefully, ensuring he could not escape. Every step he took was monitored. Every breath was accounted for. The power dynamic had been reset. The boss finally turned to the waitress. His voice was quieter now, but it carried weight. "And you? What happens to you?" She considered him for a moment, letting the silence stretch. "I walk away," she said. "With knowledge. With survival. And with discretion. That is all I require." He nodded. Respect mingled with recognition. He understood her choice. In a world built on deception and power, the ability to leave with one's life, and without compromise, was a rare gift. The lawyers began to gather their papers, cautious but relieved. The translator exhaled, still shaken but no longer panicked. The guards resumed their positions, tense but aware that the immediate danger had passed. The boss looked at the document one final time. "The 10 million, he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. It was meant to tempt, to distract. But it wasn't about the money. It was about who could see beyond it. And you have seen it all." She nodded. "And now the lesson is clear. Knowledge is survival. Observation is power. And patience is everything." The room exhaled collectively. The weight lifted, but the memory of tension lingered, a subtle hum beneath every movement. Every man present had learned something tonight, about loyalty, intelligence, and the dangers of underestimating someone who seemed insignificant. The boss rose slowly, folding his hands behind his back. He studied the waitress one last time. "You could have asked for anything," he said. "Money. Protection. Status. Why not?" She met his gaze evenly. "Because life is more valuable than gold. And discretion is worth more than power." He nodded once, a small smile breaking the tension. "Wise," he said. "Very wise." The guards opened the doors. The intermediary was escorted out, defeated but alive. The translators and lawyers followed, their respect and fear for the waitress evident in every glance. The boss remained behind for a moment, alone with her. He gestured toward the door. "Go," he said simply. "Your life. Your choice." She stepped back, picking up her bag, her movements deliberate, unhurried. "I always do," she said softly. And then she walked out. The heavy doors closed behind her with a soft thud. The room returned to quiet, but it would never be the same. The boss, the guards, the lawyers, the translator, they had all been changed. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Outside, the night was calm. The streets were empty. The city slept, unaware of the chaos and calculation that had unfolded behind closed doors. The waitress walked away. Her steps were steady, measured. She carried no weapons. No threats. Only knowledge. And that knowledge was more powerful than $10 million. Because she had not only survived. She had controlled the outcome. She had exposed betrayal. She had ensured survival. And she had proven that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one no one should ever underestimate. The night swallowed her figure, leaving behind only the echoes of a story that would be remembered in whispers, by those who had survived, and by those who had learned, too late, the price of underestimation. The mafia boss leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself to exhale. He picked up the document one last time. The words, the clauses, the hidden traps, they were irrelevant now. The lesson had been learned. And somewhere, far from the table, the quiet waitress disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but a memory of intelligence, courage, and an unwavering calm in the face of chaos. The night ended. The threat had passed. The reversal was complete. And in that reversal, the truth remained: survival is the ultimate victory, and the one who sees clearly, not the one who strikes first, holds the greatest power of all.